I'm 71 years old, and for the past 52 years I've been making monthly trips into the Olympic Mountains to visit a creature that, according to science, doesn't exist. His name is Elder. At least, that's what I call him. And he's taught me more about humanity than any human ever has. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What he told me about us, about our species, about why they stay hidden. If people knew the truth, everything we believe about ourselves would shatter. This is the story of a friendship that began with a lie and ended with a revelation that terrifies me. Because Elder didn't hide from humans out of fear. He hid from us out of pity. And what he's shown me over 5 decades suggests that humanity's greatest achievement might actually be our greatest failure. That we've been so busy congratulating ourselves on our progress that we never stopped to ask if we were heading in the right direction at all. June 1972. Olympic National Forest, Washington. I was 19 years old, angry at the world and running from a future I didn't want. My father had my life mapped out: college, business degree, take over the family lumber company. Walsh Timber had been clear-cutting old growth forests across the Pacific Northwest since 1947, and my father saw it as a legacy to be proud of. I saw it as murder. We'd been fighting for months. Every dinner table conversation turned into a screaming match about responsibility, about carrying on the family name, about not being an ungrateful disappointment. My mother would cry. My younger sister would leave the room, and I'd sit there, fists clenched, wanting to be anywhere but there. So I did what angry teenagers do. I ran away, packed a backpack with a sleeping bag, some canned food, a hunting knife, and $73 I'd saved from my summer job at a gas station. I left a note that said, "Need to think, don't look for me." And I disappeared into the Olympics for what I thought would be a few weeks of rebellion before reality dragged me home. I made it 3 days before I got completely, hopelessly lost. The Olympic Peninsula isn't like other forests. It's primordial. Some of those trees are over 1,000 years old, so massive that 5 people holding hands couldn't encircle them. The canopy blocks out so much light that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. Moss covers everything, thick and emerald green. Muffling sound, until you feel like you're walking through a cathedral where even breathing feels too loud. It's the kind of wilderness where you understand, viscerally, why ancient people believed in forest gods and spirits. Because you can feel the age of the place, feel how small and temporary you are compared to the living things that have stood there for centuries. I'd been following what I thought was a game trail, but it had petered out an hour ago, and now I was just walking, hoping to find a river, a road, a logging camp, anything familiar. My food was running low, my matches were damp, and I was starting to realize that teenage rebellion could actually get you killed. That's when I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of sound. The birds had stopped their constant chatter, the insects had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, the forest itself was waiting. I froze, hand instinctively moving to the hunting knife on my belt. It was useless against anything bigger than a rabbit, but it made me feel less helpless. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I saw him. 20 feet away, partially obscured by a massive western red cedar, stood something that made my brain short-circuit. My first thought was bear, but bears don't stand 7, maybe 8 feet tall on 2 legs. They don't have shoulders broader than any human I'd ever seen. They don't have arms that hang down past their knees, ending in hands that look disturbingly human despite being twice the size. And they don't have faces that look like someone took a human and a gorilla and created something in between. Something that shouldn't exist. The creature was covered in dark reddish-brown hair, shaggy and thick. Its face was flat with a heavy brow ridge, a broad nose, and a jaw that jutted forward. But the eyes, God, the eyes were what froze me in place. They were dark brown, almost black, and they held something I recognized despite the impossible circumstances. Intelligence. Not animal awareness, not the blank stare of a bear or cougar, but actual thinking intelligence. We stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was seeing. Every campfire story, every grainy photograph in tabloid magazines, every hoax and joke about Bigfoot came flooding back. But this wasn't a joke. This was real. This was actually happening. I waited for it to charge, to roar, to do something that would fit the monster narrative I'd been raised on. Instead, he sat down, just lowered himself to the forest floor, moving with surprising grace for something so massive, and sat cross-legged, watching me with those intelligent eyes, curious, cautious, but not aggressive. My mouth worked for several seconds before sound came out. "I'm lost," I finally managed, my voice cracking with fear and dehydration. "I've been walking for hours and I can't find my way back to the trailhead. I don't know where I am." The creature tilted its head, a gesture so human it made my skin prickle. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised one massive arm and pointed to his left. Downstream, I realized, there was the faint sound of running water in that direction. "That way?" I asked stupidly, as if I was getting directions at a gas station. "That leads out," he nodded. A clear, unmistakable nod of understanding and confirmation. I should have run, should have thanked whatever gods protected fools and disappeared in the direction he'd pointed. Any rational person would have. But I was 19, stupid with youth, and suddenly overwhelmed by the impossibility and wonder of what was sitting in front of me. "What are you?" I whispered. The creature made a sound. Not words, not anything close to human speech, but something that felt like communication. A low, rumbling vocalization that vibrated in my chest, rising and falling in a pattern that suggested language, meaning, intention. It was like listening to whale song or the way elephants communicate over long distances. You couldn't understand it, but you knew it meant something. Then he stood, unfolding to his full height, and I saw just how truly massive he was. He could have killed me with one hand, could have broken my neck as easily as snapping a twig. The power in that body was obvious, terrifying, undeniable. Instead, he pointed downstream again, more insistently this time. His expression, as much as I could read it, seemed to say, "Go, now, while it's still light." "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going. Thank you. I don't know if you understand, but thank you." I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off him, convinced that turning around would somehow trigger an attack. He watched me go, standing perfectly still, until the forest swallowed me up and he disappeared from view like he'd never been there at all. I found a logging road 2 hours later, right where following the stream led me. I hitched a ride with a timber crew heading back to Forks, and I was home by midnight. My parents were furious, relieved, and furious again. I was grounded, lectured, threatened with military school. I told no one what I'd seen. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. In the days that followed, I convinced myself it had been a hallucination, dehydration and fear creating an impossibility, the rational explanation. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the intelligence in those eyes, about how he'd helped me instead of attacking me, about the gentle way he'd pointed me toward safety, like someone giving directions to a lost child, about that vocalization, that rumbling language that suggested depth and complexity I couldn't begin to understand. 3 weeks passed. I went back to fighting with my father, back to working at the gas station. Back to a life that felt increasingly meaningless and suffocating. And then, on a Saturday morning in July, I told my parents I was going camping with friends. Instead, I drove back to the Olympics, hiked to the same trailhead, and pushed deep into the forest, following my memory back to that massive cedar tree. I had no plan. No idea what I expected to find. I just needed to know if it had been real. I reached the cedar after 3 hours of hiking, set down my pack, and waited. 2 hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. I started thinking I was insane, that it had been a hallucination after all, that I was sitting in the middle of the wilderness for no reason. Then I heard movement behind me. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with those same dark, intelligent eyes. He'd been there the whole time, observing, deciding whether to reveal himself. And when he sat down, exactly like he'd done the first time, I understood something that changed everything. This wasn't chance. This wasn't random. He'd known I'd come back. He'd been waiting for me. And that's how it started. A monthly pilgrimage that has continued, unbroken, for 52 years. The early years, 1972-1976. For the first 4 years, we couldn't communicate with words. But we developed something else, something more fundamental than language. I came back every month, sometimes twice a month when I could get away, always to the same spot near the cedar, and he was always there, waiting. Sometimes immediately, sometimes after an hour or two, but always there. At first, we just sat, 20 feet apart, watching each other, getting used to each other's presence. I'd talk sometimes, just to fill the silence, telling him about my life, my problems, my thoughts. He'd listen, his head tilted slightly, and I swear he understood the emotional content, even if the words meant nothing. Gradually, the distance between us shrank. 15 feet, 10 feet, until we were sitting close enough that I could see the details. The way his hair wasn't uniform, but varied in color and length. The scars on his hands that suggested a hard life in the wilderness. The way his nostrils flared when he was curious about something. The expressiveness of his face, which could convey curiosity, amusement, sadness, concern. I started bringing things with me. Gifts, I suppose, though I didn't think of them that way at first. More like offerings of my world. The first was a mirror. A small camping mirror I'd packed. I held it up, showing him his reflection, and his reaction stunned me. He stared at himself for a long time, then reached out slowly to touch the surface, seeming amazed that the face looking back moved when he moved. He studied himself from different angles, fascinated, and then he looked at me and made a sound that vibrated with what I interpreted as gratitude or pleasure. Books with pictures came next. National Geographic magazines, nature photography books, anything with vivid images. He couldn't read, obviously, but he'd study the photographs for hours, particularly fascinated by images of other animals, other landscapes, cities and buildings and human constructions. His massive fingers would trace the images gently, carefully, as if trying to understand the two-dimensional representation of three-dimensional things. In winter of 1973, I brought a harmonica. I'd been teaching myself to play badly, and I thought he might enjoy the music. I played a simple melody, and his reaction was immediate and powerful. He leaned forward, utterly captivated, and when I finished, he reached out his hand in a gesture that clearly meant, "May I?" I gave it to him carefully, showing him how to hold it, how to blow and draw air. Within an hour, he was playing. Not just random notes, but actual melodies. Complex, haunting, beautiful melodies that echoed through the forest like something ancient and sacred. He learned faster than any human I'd ever seen. Whatever cognitive abilities he had, they were formidable. But he taught me things too. Forest craft that went beyond anything I'd learned as a kid. How to move through the woods without making sound, placing your feet just so, distributing your weight, becoming part of the environment rather than an intruder in it. Which plants were medicinal, he'd point them out, make gestures about headaches or stomach problems, and then show me the plant that helped. How to read weather and the behavior of animals, the way birds flew differently before a storm, how deer moved when a predator was near. I became a better woodsman in 6 months with him than I'd been in 19 years of camping trips with my father. More importantly, he taught me to observe, to really see, to notice details I'd walked past my entire life, the way moss grew on the north side of trees. The patterns in animal tracks that told stories about what had happened hours before. The subtle signs that something had passed through, a bent fern, a displaced stone, a scent on the wind. And through observation, through patience, we developed a language. Gestures first, pointing for direction, touching his stomach for hunger, his chest for emotion, his head for thinking. Then, more complex ideas. He'd draw in the dirt with a stick, simple images that conveyed meaning. A sun for day, a moon for night, an image of himself for his kind, an image of me for humans. By 1974, we could have basic conversations, not about philosophy or abstract concepts yet, but about Practical things. When I'd return, what I'd bring, what he wanted to show me. I named him Elder that year, though I had no idea how old he actually was. He simply carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd seen decades pass, maybe centuries. There was a wisdom in his eyes, a patience that suggested he'd outlived most of the trees around us. He accepted the name with what I swear was amusement, touching his chest when I said it, acknowledging it as his identifier in our shared language. My father thought I was wasting my life. I'd refused college, refused the lumber company, and was working odd jobs in Port Angeles while spending every spare moment in the forest. We fought constantly, bitter arguments that drove a wedge between us that would never fully heal. You're throwing away your future for what, David? To play naturalist in the woods? To live like some hippie dropout? Maybe I don't want your future, Dad. Maybe I don't want to spend my life cutting down forests that have been growing for 1,000 years just to make money. That's naive bullshit, and you know it. The world needs lumber. We provide jobs, provide resources, provide for our family. You think your principals are going to pay your bills? If he only knew. If he only knew I was visiting a Bigfoot once a month, learning from a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, developing a friendship that was teaching me more about life than his lumber empire ever could. But I couldn't tell him, couldn't tell anyone. The secret was too big, too dangerous. If people knew Elder existed, if the scientific community discovered him, if the government found out, they'd hunt him down, capture him, study him, turn him into a specimen, a curiosity, a thing to be examined rather than a person to be respected. So I kept quiet, and I kept visiting. Month after month, season after season, year after year. The Expansion, 1976-1980. In the spring of 1976, Elder surprised me by bringing something to our meeting spot, a carved stick. It was about 2 feet long, smooth and polished, and carved with intricate patterns, geometric designs that repeated and interlocked, creating something that was unmistakably artistic, intentional, beautiful. He gave it to me, placing it in my hands with a gentle ceremony that suggested this was significant, a gift, a symbol of trust and friendship. "This is incredible," I whispered, running my fingers over the carving. The precision was remarkable. "You made this?" Elder nodded, then gestured to his chest, to me, to the stick. "For you, from me, connection." I still have that stick. It sits on my desk and I look at it every day. A reminder that art, beauty, and the desire to create aren't uniquely human traits, that the need to express oneself, to make something meaningful, transcends species. I brought him more things in return. A cassette player that ran on batteries became a fixture of our meetings. I'd bring different tapes, classical music, folk songs, jazz, blues. Elder loved all of it, but classical music affected him most profoundly. In 1978, I brought Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. His reaction stunned me. He sat perfectly still for the entire 65 minutes, barely breathing, his eyes closed. And during the Ode to Joy, tears streamed down his face, actual tears running through the hair on his cheeks, dripping onto his chest. When it ended, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he looked at me with an expression of such profound emotion that I felt tears in my own eyes. He made a gesture I'd learned meant human, then touched his chest over his heart and made the same gesture again. "Humans are capable of this," he seemed to say, "this beauty, this transcendence." It was a compliment and a question simultaneously, a recognition of what my species could achieve, and a wondering about why we didn't achieve it more often. "Yes," I said quietly, "we can create beautiful things. We can be better than we usually are." Elder touched my shoulder gently, a gesture of connection, and we sat there in the forest, listening to birdsong and feeling the weight of that shared moment. That's when I started wondering what else he knew about humans that I didn't know about his kind. How long had his people been watching us? What had they seen? What conclusions had they drawn? In 1979, I got my first glimpse of an answer. I'd brought a history book, one with photographs of World War II, the devastation of bombed cities, concentration camps, mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I wasn't sure why I brought it. Maybe I wanted his perspective. Maybe I needed to confess the sins of my species to someone who could understand without judgment. Elder studied the images for a long time, longer than he'd ever studied anything I'd brought. His expression grew darker with each page, and his breathing became heavier, more troubled. Finally, he closed the book carefully and looked at me. Then he started drawing in the dirt. Human figures, lots of them, spreading across a landscape like a virus. Then those figures destroying forests, killing animals, building structures. And then, most disturbingly, the figures turning on each other, fighting, killing. He drew the same pattern over and over, humans expanding, consuming, destroying, fighting, a cycle that repeated. Then he drew something else. Figures like himself, tall and broad, standing at the edges of the human activity, always watching, never interfering, present but unseen. He looked at me, and his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Sorrow. Deep, ancient sorrow. And that's when I understood. His people had been watching us for a long time. They'd seen this before. They'd watched human civilizations rise and fall, watched us make the same mistakes repeatedly, watched us destroy and rebuild and destroy again. They knew us better than we knew ourselves. The Revelation. August 1985. Everything changed on a hot August afternoon when I hiked in to find Elder waiting with two others. I stopped dead in my tracks 50 feet away. In 13 years, I'd never seen another of his kind. I'd assumed Elder was alone, possibly the last of his species, a remnant of something ancient clinging to existence in the deep wilderness. One was female, smaller, but still massive by human standards, maybe 6.5 feet tall, with lighter brown hair that had reddish highlights. Her face was more refined than Elder's, her eyes sharp and intelligent, assessing me with obvious caution. She stood slightly behind Elder, protective but curious. The other was younger, perhaps adolescent, maybe 5 feet tall but already heavily built. This one had darker hair, almost black, and kept partially hidden behind Elder's massive frame, peering around to look at me with wide eyes that held more curiosity than fear. My heart hammered. This was either a tremendous privilege or I was about to die. Two outcomes seemed equally possible. Elder made a series of vocalizations, that rumbling language I'd heard before, but much more complex this time. The female responded with her own vocalizations, a discussion happening that I couldn't understand but could feel the importance of. The younger one remained silent, watching. Then Elder gestured to me. His movements were slow, deliberate, clearly communicating to the others that I was safe, trusted, part of something. He turned to me and made a series of gestures, pointing to the female, to the young one, to himself. Then, bringing his hands together in a grouping gesture I'd learned meant family or group or belonging. Family. Safe. Trust. I understood immediately. This was a test and an honor. He was introducing me to his family, bringing me deeper into his world, showing me that I'd earned something precious. I sat down slowly, making myself as non-threatening as possible, keeping my movements calm and predictable. "It's okay," I said softly, keeping my voice low and steady. "I'm honored to meet you. Thank you for trusting me." The female watched me for a long moment, then made a decision. She stepped forward, moved closer, and sat down about 15 feet away. Close enough to interact, but far enough to retreat if needed. The young one followed, sitting between her and Elder, stealing glances at me like a shy child meeting a strange adult. Over the next 3 hours, through gestures, drawings in the dirt, and patience, I learned something that shook the foundations of everything I thought I understood. Elder wasn't alone. There were more of them, scattered through the deep wilderness of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Not many. Elder indicated small numbers with his fingers, suggesting maybe dozens or hundreds rather than thousands, but enough. Enough to have families, groups, culture. The female, who I later started calling Song because of the beautiful melodic vocalization she made, drew something in the dirt that took my breath away. Symbols, repeating patterns, what looked like a map or calendar system. She was teaching the young one, I realized. This was education. Knowledge being passed down from one generation to the next, language, culture, education, family structures. They weren't primitive creatures hiding in the forest because they were too simple to join human civilization. They were intelligent beings who'd chosen to stay hidden, chosen to remain apart from us, made a conscious, deliberate decision to avoid contact with humanity. And that changed everything. Because it meant they knew about us, understood us, had evaluated us, and had decided we weren't worth joining. The question that changed everything. September 1991. By 1991, I was 38 years old. I'd become a park ranger, the only job that let me protect the forests while maintaining my monthly visits without raising too much suspicion. Walsh goes on solo wilderness patrols, my supervisor would say. He knows these forests better than anyone. I'd gotten married at 30 to a woman named Sarah who worked at the ranger station. She knew I took monthly solo camping trips, but not why. We had 2 kids, Michael and Jennifer, 7 and 5 years old. I lived a double life, split between my human family and my visits with Elder and his kin. Song came to most of our meetings now. The young one, who I'd started calling Scout, visited occasionally but was still cautious around me. They were teaching me more of their language, the vocalizations that carried meaning I was slowly learning to interpret. On a September visit in 1991, I brought something different, a National Geographic magazine with extensive coverage of the Gulf War. Images of burning oil fields, destroyed cities, refugees fleeing with everything they owned, soldiers with weapons, devastation on a massive scale. I don't know why I brought it. Maybe I needed to process what I'd been seeing on the news. Maybe I wanted their perspective. Maybe, after 19 years, I needed to have a deeper conversation about what it meant to be human in a world that seemed increasingly broken. Elder studied the photographs for a long time. Song looked over his shoulder, her expression growing more troubled with each image. They exchanged vocalizations, a discussion happening that I couldn't follow but could feel the gravity of. Finally, Elder looked at me. His eyes held something I'd never seen before, not just sorrow, but something closer to disappointment or resignation. He started drawing in the dirt, elaborate images that took over an hour to create, stick figures representing humans spreading across a landscape, then those figures destroying forests, digging into the earth, building cities that grew larger and larger, then killing animals, driving other species away, and finally, most disturbingly, the human figures turning on each other, fighting over resources, over land, over ideas, weapons, fire, devastation. The pattern repeated across different sections of the drawing, over and over, expansion, consumption, conflict, destruction. Then he drew something else. Figures like himself, tall and broad-shouldered, watching from the edges of all this human activity, always present, always observing, never interfering. He looked at me, and his massive hand made a gesture I'd learned meant why. Question, confusion, the need to understand. Why do we do this? I asked, understanding his question perfectly. Why do humans destroy each other and everything around us? Elder nodded emphatically, his expression intense. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was something he'd been trying to understand for a very long time. I sat there, looking at his drawings, and I had no answer. How could I explain war, greed, hatred, tribalism to a being who'd apparently been observing humanity for God knows how long and couldn't comprehend why we behaved the way we did? I don't know, I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. We're complicated. We're capable of incredible beauty, like Beethoven, like art and poetry and acts of kindness. But we're also capable of terrible things. We have both inside us, and sometimes the terrible parts win. Elder made another gesture, one I didn't recognize. Then he drew it more clearly. A human figure with something inside its chest that was split down the middle, half shaded dark, half left light. Divided, I interpreted, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones, conflicted, at war with ourselves. Yes, I said quietly. Exactly. We're divided against ourselves. We know what's right but do what's wrong. We understand consequences but act anyway. We love and we hate, often at the same time. We're split, broken, not whole. Elder stared at me for a long moment, Then he made a gesture that meant correct, and I saw something in his eyes that chilled me. Recognition. As if this was the answer he'd been searching for, and having it confirmed was both satisfying and deeply troubling. Song made a soft vocalization, and Elder responded. Another discussion in their language that I couldn't follow. Then Elder turned back to me and drew something new. He drew his kind, the tall figures standing apart from human activity. Then he made a gesture I'd learned meant choice, decision, intention. They'd made a choice. Then he drew two paths diverging. On one path, he drew humans with their split symbols, expanding and consuming and fighting. On the other path, he drew his own kind, living simply, integrated with the forest, whole. "You're saying your people chose a different path?" I asked, my throat tight. "You could have become like us, but you chose not to?" Elder's response was a slow, deliberate nod. Then he pointed at the human path and made a gesture that meant wrong or mistake or lost. And that's when I understood something that shook me to my core. This wasn't a creature hiding from humanity because we were superior, because we were the pinnacle of evolution and they were primitive remnants. Or he was hiding from us because we'd taken a wrong turn somewhere in our development, because his people had looked at the two possible paths, complexity and simplicity, domination and integration, constant growth and sustainable existence, and they'd chosen the opposite path from humans. And from their perspective, they'd chosen correctly, and we'd chosen wrong. We sat in silence for a long time. The forest around us was peaceful, birds singing, wind rustling through the trees, the smell of cedar and earth and growing things, a world in balance, a world his people had chosen to remain part of, while mine had chosen to separate from, to dominate, to reshape according to our desires. "How long?" I finally asked. "How long have your people been watching humans?" Elder couldn't answer that in any way I could measure with numbers. But he drew the sun rising and setting over and over, an infinite loop of cycles. Then he pointed at himself, at the forest around us, and made a gesture that meant always or since the beginning. His people had been here longer than recorded human history. They'd watched us discover fire, invent agriculture, build civilizations. They'd seen empires rise and fall. They'd observed our technological progress, our wars, our triumphs and disasters, and through all of it, they'd maintained their choice to stay apart, to stay hidden, to watch from the edges while we built our tower of progress on a foundation that they recognized as flawed. "Why didn't you try to stop us?" I asked, emotion thick in my voice. "Why just watch? If you saw us going down the wrong path, why didn't you try to warn us, to show us a different way?" Elder's response was gentle but firm. He made a gesture that meant free will or choice must be owned. Then he drew the two paths again, emphasizing the divergence point at the beginning. His people had chosen one path, and we'd chosen another. To interfere would be to violate something fundamental, the right of a species to make its own choices, even wrong ones, even destructive ones. But then Elder drew something that gave me a flicker of hope. He drew a human figure walking along the divided path, that split symbol visible in its chest. Then that figure stopped, paused, and slowly began walking backward, returning to the divergence point. And from there, the figure started walking along the other path, the unified path, and as it walked, the split symbol in its chest began to heal, the two halves coming together. "You're saying we can change?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. "That humans can choose differently? That we can heal our division and walk your path instead?" Elder nodded, but then made a gesture that meant rare. Very rare. Difficult. Most humans, he seemed to say, were too far along the wrong path to turn back, too invested in the division, too committed to the patterns of consumption and conflict, too lost in their own internal war to find their way back to wholeness. "Is that why you've been meeting with me?" I asked, tears burning in my eyes. "All these years, 19 years now, because you think I might be one who could change? Who could choose differently?" Elder didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and placed his massive hand on my shoulder, gently, carefully. Always aware of his own strength. The gesture was tender, protective, filled with affection. Then he pointed at me and made several gestures in sequence, the split symbol, Then that symbol slowly coming together, then the unified symbol, then touching his heart. You were divided. You are healing. You are becoming whole. This makes me happy. I sat in that forest and wept, not gentle tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed inside me. Because he was right. When I'd first met him at 19, I'd been angry, lost, divided against myself, fighting with my father and rejecting everything but not knowing what I wanted instead. And over 19 years of monthly visits, of sitting in the forest with a being who embodied wholeness, who lived integrated with the world instead of fighting against it, I'd been healing. Slowly, unconsciously, I'd been learning to bring my own divided halves together. I'd found my path because Elder had shown me, patiently, month after month, year after year, that another way existed. Song made a soft vocalization, and Scout, who'd been watching silently, moved closer and gently touched my arm. A gesture of comfort from a being who barely knew me, but recognized suffering and wanted to help. We sat together until the sun began to set, 4 beings from 2 different species, sharing a moment of connection that transcended everything that should have made it impossible. That was September 1991. George H.W. Bush was president. The Soviet Union was collapsing. And in a forest in Washington, a man was learning that everything his species believed about progress and superiority might be built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to be intelligent. The Deepening. 1992-2003. Over the next decade, Elder slowly revealed more. Not through lengthy explanations, our communication, while sophisticated, still had limits, but through images, through demonstrations, through patient teaching that built up a picture over months and years. His people had history. Deep history that stretched back further than I could comprehend. They had stories passed down through generations, teaching stories that conveyed wisdom about how to live, how to treat the forest, how to maintain balance. Song demonstrated some of this for me in 1993. She created a series of images in the dirt over several hours, a visual story about her people's past. Figures living in harmony with forests and animals, knowledge passed from old to young, choices made collectively by groups not imposed by leaders, no wars, no conquest, no empires, but also no advancement, no technology, no cities or agriculture or written language or any of the things humans pointed to as proof of our superiority. Except they'd made those choices intentionally. That was the crucial part I'd been missing. They weren't primitive because they couldn't advance. They were simple because they'd decided simplicity was wiser. They'd seen where complexity led. Somehow, whether through observing humans or through their own ancient history, they'd concluded that the path of technological progress was a trap, that it created more problems than it solved, that it divided beings from the world they were part of. In 1995, Elder showed me something that clarified this even further. I'd brought a newspaper with articles about the Oklahoma City bombing. Another act of human violence, more death and destruction, more evidence of our divided nature. Elder studied it, then drew a complex image. He showed humans creating tools, simple at first, then increasingly complex. Each new tool gave humans more power, fire, weapons, machines, each one increasing our ability to shape the world. But then he drew something brilliant. As the tools got more powerful, the split in the human chess symbol grew larger, wider, more pronounced. More power equaled more division. I stared at that drawing for a long time, feeling the truth of it. Every increase in our technological capability had come with increased capacity for destruction. More power to heal, but also more power to harm. More ability to create, but also more ability to destroy. You're saying that power itself is the problem? I asked. That the more powerful we become, the more dangerous our internal division becomes. Elder made the gesture for correct, then drew something else. A figure with the unified symbol, living simply, with only basic tools. Then, a figure with the split symbol, surrounded by complex technology, wielding enormous power but increasingly torn apart by its own internal conflict. Which would you choose? His expression seemed to ask. And I had no answer. Because from inside human civilization, with all its comforts and conveniences and achievements, choosing to give up power seemed impossible. We were addicted to it. We measured progress by the accumulation of it. But sitting in that forest, having lived half my life with weekly or monthly escapes into simplicity, I could feel the appeal of the other path, the peace that came from wanting less, from being content with enough, from living integrated instead of separate. Over the following years, I brought more newspapers, more magazines, more evidence of human activity. The Kosovo War in 1998, the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Each time, Elder's reaction was the same: sorrow, resignation, and that gesture, meaning same pattern, repeating. We never learned. We made the same mistakes over and over, believing each time that this war would bring peace. This act of violence would end violence. This accumulation of power would finally make us secure. And his people watched from the forests, understanding what we couldn't see, that we were trapped in a cycle of our own creation, and the only way out was to choose differently at the fundamental level. To choose wholeness over division, simplicity over complexity, integration over domination. But we wouldn't. We couldn't. We were too far along the wrong path to turn back. Except for individuals, rare individuals who could still make the choice. Individuals like me. The warning, 2008. By 2008, I was 55 years old. My kids were grown, Michael working as an environmental lawyer, Jennifer teaching elementary school. My wife Sarah had learned about Elder 5 years earlier, after I finally confessed the truth. She'd been angry about the decades of secrets, but when I brought her to meet him, she understood. She saw what I saw, a person, not a creature, a friend, not a specimen. She came with me sometimes now, and Elder seemed to enjoy her presence, especially when she brought books about art history. Song, in particular, was fascinated by human creativity, paintings, sculptures, architecture, as if trying to understand how a species so divided could create such beauty. But 2008 brought different news. The financial crisis was unfolding, and I brought Elder newspapers about the collapse. Stock markets crashing, banks failing, millions of people losing their homes, jobs, entire futures, erased by the greed and recklessness of others. Elder's reaction was different this time. Instead of sorrow, I saw something closer to resignation, or perhaps the absence of surprise. He drew an elaborate image that took almost 2 hours. Humans building higher and higher, towers reaching toward the sky. Each level representing increasing complexity and power. People climbing, striving, always reaching for more. And then those towers crumbling, collapsing under their own weight, falling back to the ground. He drew this 3 times, 3 separate cycles, 3 times that human civilization had built high and then fallen. I stared at the drawings, my blood running cold. "You've seen this before?" I whispered. "You've watched civilizations rise and fall? Multiple times?" Elder made a gesture that meant many times, not just 3. Many. "How long?" My voice was barely audible. "How long have your people been watching humans?" He couldn't answer that in years or centuries, but he drew the sun rising and setting over and over, an infinite loop that suggested time beyond my comprehension. Then he pointed at himself, at the ancient trees around us, at the mountains in the distance, and made a gesture that meant always here, since before your counting began. His people had been here, watching, for longer than recorded human history. They'd seen civilizations rise in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, countless others. They'd watched each one grow powerful, complex, divided, and eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. And they'd seen it happen not just in one part of the world, but everywhere humans settled, the same pattern, repeating across continents and millennia. "Why didn't you try to stop us?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Why just watch it happen over and over?" Elder's response was the same as always, the gesture for free will, the drawing of 2 paths diverging. His people couldn't force humans to choose differently, couldn't impose their wisdom on us, could only watch, document, remember, and hope that eventually, somehow, we'd figure it out. But then Elder drew something new, something that terrified me. He drew the current towers, the modern human civilization, taller than any of the previous cycles, more complex, more powerful, more divided. And when this tower fell, he indicated with dark shading and emphatic gestures, the collapse would be bigger than anything before. "You're saying we're heading for a collapse worse than anything in history?" I asked. Elder nodded slowly. Then he drew something else. The earth itself, damaged, forests disappearing, animals dying, the air and water poisoned. Previous collapses had been local, regional, affecting one civilization at a time. But this time, humans had spread across the entire planet. This time, the collapse would be global. And this time, we might take the whole world down with us. I felt sick. When? How long do we have? Elder made a gesture that meant uncertain or unknown. He drew the tower wavering, cracks appearing, but not yet falling. Soon, maybe. Or not yet, but inevitable. Is there anything we can do? Any way to stop it? Elder drew two scenarios. In one, the tower continued to rise, the cracks widened, and it collapsed catastrophically. In the other, humans stopped building higher, stopped reaching for more power, more complexity, more growth, started dismantling the tower carefully, returning to simpler ways, healing the division. But then he made a gesture that meant very difficult, or almost impossible, and he shaded the second scenario very lightly, suggesting how unlikely it was. "You don't think we'll choose that, do you?" I said. "You think we'll keep building until it all comes down?" Elder's expression held infinite sadness. He pointed at his own people, scattered and hidden, watching from the forests. Then he made a gesture that meant waiting. They would wait, observing, documenting, remembering, until the collapse came. "And after?" I asked. "When humans finally destroy themselves, will your people finally come out of hiding?" Elder's response chilled me to my core. He drew humans, scattered and broken after some catastrophe. Populations reduced, civilization collapsed, survivors struggling. Then he drew his people, still in the forests, still hidden. "You won't help us?" My voice was strained. "Even if we're dying, even if our children are starving, you'll just watch?" Elder made a gesture that meant cannot, not will not. Then he drew something that took my breath away. He showed humans as a tree with two possible branches growing from the trunk. One branch grew twisted, darker, eventually breaking under its own weight. The other branch grew straight, unified, becoming something beautiful and sustainable. But, and this was crucial, the choice of which branch happened at the base of the tree, not the top. The choice was made early in development, and once a civilization went too far along one branch, the trajectory was set. "You're saying it's too late for us?" I whispered. "We already chose wrong, and now we just have to live with the consequences?" Elder made a gesture that meant maybe, then drew something else. A single human figure at the base of the tree, choosing the straight branch. Then another figure. Then another. Not the whole civilization, but individuals, one at a time. One at a time, he seemed to say. Individuals can still choose, but not civilization as a whole. "So, what's the point?" I asked, emotion thick in my throat. "What's the point of individuals choosing correctly if the whole system is going to collapse anyway?" Elder's response was the most important thing he'd ever communicated to me. He drew himself and me, sitting together in the forest. Then he made the gesture for this connection, this friendship, this moment of understanding between species. And then he made a gesture that meant enough or valuable or what matters. The specific outcome didn't matter as much as the quality of the journey. The collapse might come, probably would come, but that didn't negate the value of individuals choosing wholeness, choosing integration, choosing to live consciously and well. This small friendship, this monthly meeting between species, this was as much as could be hoped for. Not grand salvation, not preventing the collapse, but creating pockets of meaning and connection and wisdom within the larger chaos. And maybe, just maybe, those individuals who chose wholeness would be the seeds for whatever came after, would be the ones who remembered how to live differently when the tower finally fell and it was time to rebuild. The decline. 2009-2019. The years that followed were harder, not because of our friendship, that only deepened, but because I could feel time running out. I was aging. By 2015, I was 62, dealing with arthritis in my knees and a heart condition that required medication. The monthly hikes into the forest became more difficult, though I never missed one. Elder was aging too, though more slowly. His hair was grayer, his movements slightly stiffer, but his mind remained sharp. Song had brought her own young to meet me in 2010, two adolescents who were cautious but curious. The next generation, learning about the strange human who visited their elder, who could be trusted despite being part of a species that generally couldn't be. Scout, now fully adult, had become a regular part of our meetings. He'd developed a fascination with human writing and would spend hours studying books I brought, tracing letters with his finger as if trying to decode the mystery of how we preserved thought across time. In 2014, Sarah died. Cancer, fast and brutal, taking her from diagnosis to death in 7 months. I brought Elder the news, and he held me while I cried, his massive arms gentle and comforting, his own eyes wet with tears for my loss. "I'm alone again," I told him, just like when we first met. Except now I'm old and tired and running out of time. Elder made a gesture I'd learned meant not alone. Then he touched his chest, touched mine, and made the unified symbol. "We are connected. You have family here?" And he was right. After 42 years, Elder knew me better than anyone, better than Sarah had, better than my children did. He'd seen me grow from an angry teenager to a man struggling with purpose, to someone who'd finally found peace. He'd been the constant in my life, the one thing that never changed and never wavered, never disappointed. In 2016, Michael, my son, learned about Elder. I was getting too old to safely make the hikes alone, and I needed someone to know, to help, to carry on after I was gone. Michael's reaction was skepticism, then shock, then awe. He came with me on a visit, meeting Elder with the same mixture of fear and wonder I'd experienced 44 years earlier. By the end of that first meeting, he understood why I'd kept this secret for so long. "Dad," he said as we hiked back, "do you understand what this means? What you've been protecting all these years? This is the most important discovery in the history of anthropology." He's not a discovery, Michael. He's a person, a friend. And the moment the world knows he exists is the moment he loses everything, his freedom, his dignity, his peace. But think about what we could learn, about human evolution, about alternative paths of development, about no. The answer is no. I've spent 44 years protecting him from that exact mindset. He's not here to teach humans anything they're willing to learn, and I won't be the one to destroy his life just because the scientific community might benefit. Michael struggled with this, but eventually he came to understand. He kept the secret, visited with me regularly, and formed his own relationship with Elder. By 2018, I was 65, officially retired, and my health was declining more noticeably. My knees were bad enough that I sometimes needed a cane. My heart condition was managed but worrying. Elder and I both knew our time was limited. In early 2019, Elder did something he'd never done before. He brought me deeper into the forest than we'd ever gone, to a place I'd never seen. A hidden valley where several of his kind lived, maybe 20 individuals total, ranging from ancient elders to young children. It was a glimpse into their world, their private space, their home, and it was beautiful. They lived in harmony with the forest, taking only what they needed, leaving no trace of permanent structures, moving with the seasons in patterns established over thousands of years. This is what we choose, Elder seemed to be saying. This simplicity, this integration, this peace, this is what your species rejected in favor of complexity and power. And looking at that hidden valley, at those beings living so lightly on the earth, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, not for myself, but for humanity. For what we could have been if we'd chosen differently all those millennia ago. We stayed until sunset, and as we prepared to leave, one of the ancient elders, even older than the one I knew, impossibly ancient, approached me. She studied me for a long time with eyes that held more wisdom and sorrow than I could process. Then she made a gesture I'd never seen before. She touched her heart, then touched mine. then opened her hands and made a releasing gesture, like letting something go. I looked at Elder, confused. He made a series of gestures. She sees, she knows, she blesses, she releases you. Releases me from what? I asked. Elder's response shook me. He drew a human at the base of the tree, choosing between the two paths. Then he drew me specifically, standing at that divergence point even now, even at 65, even after everything. You can still choose, he indicated. You've been preparing, but you must make the final choice. What choice? I don't understand. Elder drew two scenarios. In one, I kept their secret, protected them as I'd always done, and eventually died with the knowledge locked inside me. The secret remained safe, but the wisdom remained hidden. In the other scenario, I told the world, revealed everything, showed humanity that another path existed, that beings had chosen differently and thrived. The secret would be exposed, Elder and his kind would lose their anonymity, but maybe, just maybe, some humans would hear the message and choose differently. You're asking me to decide whether to reveal you, I said, stunned. After 47 years of secrecy, you're asking me to go public? Elder made a complex series of gestures. Time is short, towers cracking. Some humans might still choose, but choice must be yours. We cannot choose for you. I looked at that ancient elder, at Elder himself, at Song and Scout and all the others visible in that hidden valley. Beings who'd managed to live for thousands of years in balance with the world, who'd avoided the traps of power and complexity, who embodied wholeness in a way humans had forgotten was even possible. I need to think, I said. This is too big. I can't decide now. Elder nodded, understanding, but the ancient elder made one more gesture before we left. She pointed at the sky, at the sun setting, and made a gesture that meant soon. Time was running out. For me, for them, for the choice that needed to be made. The final teaching. 2020 present. The COVID pandemic hit in 2020, and for the first time in 48 years, I missed visits with Elder. Lockdowns and my age made the hikes too risky. Michael went in my place sometimes, bringing news and checking that Elder and his family were safe. The pandemic clarified something for me. The whole world shut down, human civilization ground to a halt, and people everywhere were forced to slow down, to simplify, to confront what actually mattered. And for a brief moment, I saw glimpses of what Elder's people had chosen. People baking bread, growing gardens, rediscovering simple pleasures, appreciating nature, connecting with family. The tower stopped growing for a moment, and people remembered what it felt like to live at ground level. But it didn't last. As soon as restrictions lifted, we rushed back to complexity, back to consumption, back to building the tower higher. We'd been given a chance to choose differently, and we'd rejected it almost immediately. In June 2021, I was finally vaccinated and healthy enough to make the hike. Elder was waiting, and his eyes held a question. Have you decided? About going public? I don't know. I'm terrified of what would happen to you, to your people. But I'm also terrified of dying without anyone knowing what you've taught me. Elder drew again. The tower, cracks spreading, ready to fall. Then individual humans, some with the unified symbol, some still divided. And finally, a question mark. How many might choose differently if they knew we existed? If they knew another path was possible? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe none. Maybe telling the world would change nothing except destroying your peace. Or maybe a few would understand. A few might choose wholeness over division. Elder made a gesture that meant, this is your choice. He couldn't make it for me. His people had decided long ago to remain hidden, but they'd also decided not to interfere with human choices. If I chose to reveal them, they'd accept it. If I chose to keep the secret, they'd accept that too. But time was running out for the choice to matter. I spent the next months wrestling with the decision. Michael argued for secrecy. Dad, the moment you go public, government agents will be all over this forest. Scientists will hunt Elder down. His life will be destroyed. But another part of me, the part Elder had been nurturing for 49 years, argued differently. What was the point of wisdom if it died with me? What was the point of learning another way if no one else ever benefited from it? In March 2022, I made my decision. I would tell the story, but carefully, not with locations, not with specifics that would let people find Elder. Just the message that another species chose differently than humans, that intelligence doesn't require complexity, that wholeness is possible, that the divided path we're on isn't the only option. Let people dismiss it as fiction, as delusion, as the ravings of an old man who spent too much time alone in the forests. That was fine. The ones who needed to hear it would hear it. The ones ready to choose differently would recognize the truth in it. And Elder and his people would remain hidden, protected by the same skepticism that had kept them safe for millennia. No one would believe me enough to mount serious expeditions, but some might believe me enough to consider their own division, their own choices, their own path. When I told Elder my decision on my next visit in May 2022, his response was subtle but profound. He placed both hands on my shoulders, looked directly into my eyes, and made a sound I'd never heard before. Low, resonant, carrying through the forest like a bell tolling. Song and Scout emerged from the trees, along with several others. They'd all been waiting, listening, and now they came forward to witness this moment. Elder made a series of gestures to his gathered kin, explaining my choice. Then they did something I'd never seen. They formed a circle around me, all of them, and they made that same resonant sound together. A chorus of voices that vibrated through my entire body that seemed to resonate with the forest itself. I stood in the center of that circle, tears streaming down my face, and I understood. This was their blessing, their acknowledgement that I'd chosen, that I'd become whole enough to carry their message, that I was being released to do what I thought was right. When the sound faded and the circle broke, Elder made one final gesture. He pointed at my heart, then at his own. Then he brought his hands together and made the unified symbol. What you carry, I carry. What I am, you are. We are one. Why I'm telling this now, October 2024. I'm 71 years old now. Last month, in October 2024, I made my 624th visit to Elder. The hike took me 3 hours instead of the usual 90 minutes. My knees screamed at me the whole way, but I made it. Elder's old now too. His hair's almost entirely gray, and his movements are slow and deliberate, but his eyes are still sharp, still full of the intelligence and wisdom I first recognized 52 years ago. We sat together in our usual spot, and I asked him one final question. Why? Of all the humans you could have chosen, why me? Why did you reveal yourself to that angry 19-year-old kid? Why spend 52 years teaching me? Elder's response was simple. He drew me as I was at 19, the split symbol prominent, the division deep, the inner conflict consuming me. Then he drew me over time, over years, that split slowly healing, the two halves gradually coming together. Then he pointed at me as I am now, old, tired, but whole, unified, at peace with myself in a way I never was as a young man. He made a gesture that meant this transformation, this healing. This was what he'd been waiting for, working toward, hoping to achieve. You're saying I was divided when we met, and now I'm... Elder nodded. Then he pointed at me and drew me walking back toward other humans. Carrying something. A light, maybe. Knowledge, understanding. You will spread what you've learned. Some will hear, not many, but some. And that's enough? After 52 years, reaching a few people is enough? Elder made the gesture for yes, then drew again. A single seed, planted in soil. Then a tree growing from that seed. Then seeds from that tree, spreading, creating more trees. One person, choosing wholeness, influences others. Slowly. Across time. This is how change happens. Not through grand revolutions or movements. Elder made the gesture for no. He drew towers collapsing, quick, dramatic, destructive. Then he drew trees growing, slow, patient, sustainable. Real change is like trees, not towers. And sitting there, in that forest with those ancient trees surrounding us, I understood. The tower humans had built would collapse. Probably soon, definitely eventually. That was almost inevitable now. But trees would remain, and the knowledge of how to grow properly, how to live in balance, how to choose wholeness, that could be preserved in individuals. passed on like seeds, ready to sprout when the conditions were right, maybe after the collapse, maybe before, but ready. What I know now. So here I am, telling you this story, knowing that most of you won't believe it, that scientists will dismiss it, skeptics will mock it, and the government will likely investigate and find nothing, because I'm not telling you where Elder lives or how to find him. Let them think I'm senile. Let them think I've spent too much time alone in the forests and confused my imagination with reality. That's fine. That's actually perfect, because it keeps Elder safe. But some of you will hear something else in this story. Some of you will recognize your own division, your own split between who you are and who you could be, your own inner conflict between heart and mind. And maybe, just maybe, you'll choose to heal it. That's what Elder taught me. We're divided. Our minds race ahead while our hearts lag behind, or our hearts want one thing while our minds choose another. We build towers of achievement on foundations of inner conflict. We create beauty while simultaneously destroying the world around us. We love and hate, often toward the same things at the same time. And we have a choice. Not as a civilization, maybe that ship has sailed, maybe the tower's too tall to safely dismantle now. But as individuals, we can choose to become whole, to align mind and heart, to live simply, to take only what we need, to find peace in being rather than in constant striving, to integrate ourselves with the world instead of trying to dominate it. Elders' people made that choice thousands of years ago. They looked at the two paths and chose simplicity over complexity, integration over domination, wholeness over power. They're not primitive. They're not less evolved. They're what wisdom looks like when it's given 10,000 years to mature, when it's not corrupted by the addictive nature of power and progress. They're what we could have been if we'd chosen differently. And here's the crucial part. It's not too late for the choice that matters. The individual choice. The choice to heal your own division, to become unified within yourself, to walk a different path, even if everyone around you is still building the tower. That's what changes things, not government policy or technological innovation or revolutionary movements. Those are all tower-building activities, just different ways of trying to grow upward. Real change happens at the root level, one person at a time, choosing wholeness and then influencing the people around them through example rather than force. That's what Elder's been teaching me for 52 years. The message. I don't know how much time I have left. My doctors are concerned about my heart, and every hike into the forest could be my last. Michael has promised to continue visiting Elder after I'm gone, to maintain the connection, to keep learning. But I needed to tell this story while I still could, needed to put into words what Elder has shown me through gesture and patience and 52 years of friendship. The message is simple. Humanity is not the pinnacle of evolution or the inevitable conclusion of intelligence. We're just one path, one choice, one way of being, and there are other ways, quieter ways, wiser ways, ways that chose simplicity over complexity, integration over domination, wholeness over division. Those ways are still out there, watching from the forests, waiting patiently for us to remember what we forgot when we chose to build the tower instead of growing like trees. We're divided, and that division is killing us. It's killing our world. It's killing each other, and it's killing our own souls. We know what's right, but do what's wrong. We understand consequences, but act anyway. We love what we destroy, and destroy what we love. But we can heal. Individually, personally, one divided soul at a time. We can choose to become whole, to align our hearts and minds, to live consciously and deliberately, to take only what we need, to exist in balance instead of constantly reaching for more. Will it save civilization? Probably not. The tower's too tall, the cracks too deep, the momentum too strong. But it will save you. And that matters. That individual salvation, that personal wholeness, that's what Elder has been showing me is valuable in itself. And maybe, if enough individuals choose it, we become seeds, ready to grow differently when the tower finally falls and it's time to start over. The final word. Next month, in November 2024, I'll make visit number 625, if my body allows it. And Elder will be there, waiting like he always is. Because he made a choice 52 years ago. He chose to trust one angry human kid. To teach him. To show him a different way of being. To patiently, over decades, help that kid heal his division and become whole. And maybe that's enough. Maybe one human transformed over 52 years is worth it. Maybe that's how wisdom actually spreads. Not through books or lectures or grand pronouncements, but through patient relationships where wholeness is demonstrated rather than taught, where the example speaks louder than any explanation. I hope you hear what I'm saying. Not with your skeptical mind that wants proof and evidence and scientific validation, but with the part of you that recognizes truth when it hears it, the part that knows deep down that you're divided and that division is hurting you. I hope you see your own split, the way your mind and heart pull in different directions. The way you know what you should do but do something else, the way you're never quite at peace with yourself, and I hope you choose to heal it, however that looks for you, whatever path that takes. The specifics don't matter. What matters is the choice to become whole. That's what Elder would want. That's what I want. That's what changes everything. Because the truth about humans isn't that we're superior or inferior to other intelligent species. It's that we chose a path that prioritizes power over peace, complexity over simplicity, division over wholeness. And that choice has consequences we're living with now. But individual humans can still choose differently, can still walk the other path, can still become whole. And in a world heading toward collapse, wholeness is the most revolutionary act possible. I'm 71 years old. I've spent 52 years visiting a creature that science says doesn't exist, learning from a being that chose simplicity over progress, integration over domination, wholeness over power. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because some friendships transcend species, some wisdom transcends language, and some truths are too important to die with the people who learn them. This is Elder's truth. This is what he's been trying to show humanity through our 52-year conversation. We chose wrong, but individually, we can still choose right. That's the message. That's what changes everything.